Good morning, Dr. Christine Ketel. Warm greetings to audience on the other parts of the globe, and good afternoon to everyone here in our time zone. We feel very happy having Dr. Christine Ketel here as our third guest speaker for the one-day lecture series for the exhibition Enchanting Expeditions, Chinese Street Porcelains Across the Globe. Dr. Ketel is an independent researcher based in Amsterdam, and she was coordinator and research assistant in the Department of History of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. In 1982, edited the publication of the ceramic load of the Wheat Loom, known as the White Lion Shipwreck, sank in 1613. This is a very popular and important publication and a must-read if you're interested in Chinese street porcelain. From 1985 to present, she was been giving presentations and written articles on the history of the VOC, cracked panel porcelain, Chinese ceramics for the Dutch market, and the ethical side of shipwreck salvages. Dr. Ketel stayed active and conducted numerous field trips, include kiln sites in South China and archaeological sites in Asia and Africa. She was invited to international conferences and has presented papers worldwide. And this is also how we met and know each other. Dr. Ketel obtained her PhD in humanities at Leiden University in September this year, and is currently updating and digitalizing the publication of the ceramic load of the Wheat Loom and setting up a database on shipwreck ceramics. Today, Dr. Ketel will deliver a lecture entitled The Beginnings of Dutch Trade in Asia and Shipments of Chinese Porcelain, 1595 to circa 1622. Please join me to welcome Dr. Ketel. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guang Yu. And it's a very great pleasure and honor to be able to be part of your lecture series, which I think is going very well. And I'm very sad, and a lot of my friends and colleagues are also sad that we cannot be live there in Hong Kong, one of our favorite places to go to, but who knows, it might happen someday. So I'll start with the first slide, and it's already present. I'm making a little bit of, well, what do you call it? I wanted just to show the cover of my thesis, which is called Dutch Demand for Porcelain. And the subtitle, which is part of the lecture, is, can I have the next slide, please? Sorry, can I have, yes. This is the chapter 5, and that is about the lecture today. Beginnings of Dutch trade in Asia and shipments of Chinese porcelain in the early period, which is not really very well known, because the history of the whole Dutch trade company in porcelain is usually focused on the Kangxi, the Qing dynasty, and not so much on the late Ming dynasty. So the first topics I'm going to talk about is why was there actually interest for porcelain in Europe, and what happened before the establishment of the VOC. The Spanish and Portuguese traders came, as is well known. And what did they bring back to Europe? What was done with it? And then what happened after that, after the VOC company established? So that is about my subject today. Next, please. Well, let's go back before the 17th, yes, sorry, no, that one, yeah. Before the 17th century in Europe, the common people used had no porcelain and only used earthen bowls, and also wooden plates and some metal items to spoons, pewter, usually made of pewter or tin. So it was absolutely unknown in the circles of the common people what porcelain actually is. Next, please. These are some of the utensils, items which have been found in the places in various regions in the Netherlands. And it shows the usual items which were used daily by the Dutch people. Flat plates, a sort of, what do you call it, a cooking utensil, and a soup bowl and something to drink from, all made of plain earthenware with a glaze, covered glaze, which was of course not very healthy for the for people, because it was well, poisonous, had some poison in it. Next, please. And I show this painting because I think it's very a token of how the rich people at that period, it's an early painting, I'm not exactly sure of the date, to show that even rich people at that period, in the beginning of the 17th century, did not use, did not even possess Chinese porcelain for daily use. They gathered around the table and had their food, their consumption together. But it was not common to have plates and dishes, cups, bowls for their daily use. Next, please. Like I said, tin and pewter were the most common materials which were used for their daily consumption, let's say, eating from or even displaying something, as in one of the pictures shows. And this was, of course, a very handy type of material because it did not get broken. And it has been found in some shipwrecks in the area which used to be the sea in the north of Holland. So very durable material, and it was also taken on board, of course, by the officers and the sailors for the long journeys to Asia. Next, please. As is well known, of course, the Portuguese and the Spanish were the first European traders to reach Asia. And as you can see on the map, they took the route along the African coast, went by the Cape of Good Hope, then along the eastern coast of South Africa, right up to cross over to India, Goa, where they had their first very important trade posts. Now, the route was not always very calm. So there are many shipwrecks of the Portuguese along the southeast coast of Africa. I visited that area, and Valerie Esterhuizen has written a wonderful thesis about all the porcelain shards which have been washed up along the coast of South Africa. Chinese porcelain shards. So that's another part of the history which has, I find, been neglected and should also be brought up again. Next, please. How do we know what arrived in Portugal and Spain? Well, that subject has also been researched very well by Sinta Kra about the Spanish inventories. She has made her thesis on that. And Teresa Canepa, who will be the next speaker, I think, or maybe after 2 weeks. And it is interesting that there are a lot of inventories which mention some of the porcelain, but of course nobody really knows what it looked like. They also show in their thesis that indeed at some archaeological sites in Portugal and Spain, shards have been found, and these can be traced back to the the places where they were made in China. Next, please. And what did the rich, the nobility, the royal families do with their Chinese porcelain? It was so precious and so, so unique that there are many examples of mounted, what we call mounted Chinese porcelain. And the mounts can be dated when they were made, the silver or the gold. And they are all traceable. Most of them are in, I think the Metropolitan has one and Burley House has a few. So they are all able to be traced. Next, please. Of course, the Portuguese and Spanish wanted some of their own designs on the porcelain, on the Chinese porcelain. So what they did was they ordered, they gave the designs, the patterns on their orders of flasks, or next please. And sometimes even on pieces which were not European at all, but had already been made, for example, for the Middle East. So there's one example of the Topkapi Palace Museum, and another one which resembles, the shape resembles that one. It is clearly not a European shape, but it does have a pattern of the coat of arms, but it has been painted upside down. So the Chinese designers did not really know what the designs meant. Next, please. And sometimes they attempted also to copy European shapes. Now you see a blue and white Chinese porcelain bowl with very tiny little handles. And on the inside is also an inscription which is not Chinese. And I presume that I assume that the bowl, the porridge bowl on the earthenware, which had probably been taken along for the trips to the East, had been given to one of the Chinese merchants to be copied. But as in China, there's no custom of these little small handles. I don't think it was a success because there are only very few examples exist of the Chinese copy, of attempt to a copy. And beneath that is another interesting example of an earthenware water flask, which was found in Portugal. And the copy, or the attempt for a copy, I think was not quite exactly what it should have become. And as far as I know, it is the only example of a Chinese attempt to copy this strange earthenware water flask. Thank you. Next one, please. Well, what happened then? Or rather, let's say, how did the porcelain reach Northern Europe? This was done by, as I said, by the Portuguese, and Antwerp was the main area, the main city, marketplace, trading place, where the goods, the commodities from everywhere, not only from Asia, were being sold. But when there were a lot of wars going on in Europe, and at that time in 1585, the northern part of the Netherlands, which is Orange, had been cut off from the southern lowlands, the part which is also now Belgium, by the Spanish. And they also had Antwerp in their hands. So there was not any possibility to to buy porcelain in Antwerp anymore, the porcelain which had been delivered by the Portuguese. And for the rich families and the people in the northern provinces, well, that was a disaster, because also the spices, the pepper and the nutmeg and everything which they needed desperately was also not available. Next, please. What happened then was that rich merchants gathered together and they set up private companies who financed fleets, because it cost fleets of ships to be able to send to Asia. Of course, it's a bit complicated. There were small companies, and the larger ones took over the smaller ones, etc. So I won't bother you with that. Next, please. But what happened also was one of the small companies attempted to reach China via the North Pole. And I don't have a pointer, but you can see that they tried to, one route goes up right along the Scandinavian peninsula. And of course, what happened then is they got stuck in the ice, because they thought it would be shorter route to go via the North Pole to reach China that way, instead of going all the way down South Africa, where there were a lot of storms and disasters. But this was also a disaster. So there was a group, and they managed even to survive a very, very horrible winter and get back to Holland, of course, losing a lot of crew. And so that attempt was not done again. Next, please. The better one was the Portuguese one, and the Portuguese had been already doing this for years and years. The route leaked out. Let's say one of the travelers was able to provide the Dutch merchants of the navigation routes, and so they started also going finally themselves to Asia. Next, please. The first voyages were from 1595 to 1599. And of course, it was very exciting and very, well, what was going to happen and what could they get? It has all been recorded, documented. Very interesting to follow what happened on the journeys to Asia and back again, and what happened when they reached Asia. Of course, it's a very old Dutch written. Next, please. What they did reach was the market harbor of Bantam, sometimes called Banten because it's the province of Banten, but the marketplace, harbor place itself is usually known as Bantam, on the tip of Java. And what they found there was glorious, because it was full of all kinds of merchants coming from the Spice Islands, from other parts of Asia with their goods, even Arabs coming down with their silks and textiles to be sold. Traded, of course, they traded it all for their spices, and that was the whole idea of the Dutch, except they didn't have much to trade, so they had to buy these spices. Next, please. Luckily they had enough cash, or whatever they had, and returned with very successful amounts of spices and paper, sandalwood, musk, mace, you name it. It was all able to be bought there and taken back if the ship did not get wrecked on the way back. Next, please. Now, what happened during these first voyages, they did not immediately buy large amounts of porcelain, because they had, in the first place, no idea how to find it. And the first voyages actually was sniffing around, and some of the other merchants of other countries offered porcelain to the Dutch merchants. And in the second voyage, they attempted themselves to go and buy some porcelain. And finally, it's still the beginning, one of the captains, it's not exactly known how, but he managed to obtain a very large amount of items, about 300. And this list exists. So we know that in 1600, this captain was able to buy all kinds of cups, saucers, bowls with a flat rim. It's all described very detailed, which is a really very important, wonderful document. Next, please. How did these look like? Well, we're lucky another document was discovered, and this comes from the logbook of a ship, Gelderland, which was on its return journey back to Holland. And apparently one of the crew members, who was probably bored during the very long months of sailing back to home, decided to sketch some of these porcelains. And I don't think it was a large amount. It must have been some private, just like the captain before I mentioned. So probably one of the crew, maybe himself, bought some of these precious porcelain items. And we get a very, very good idea of what they were. Next, please. The actual tangible ones can be found in the shipwreck of the San Diego, which dates from exactly the same period. So the drawings coincide very, very well with the actual pieces which have come from this shipwreck. A very important discovery, and should also be noted that it was the first shipwreck which has really a very diverse amount of blue and white porcelain, including the crack panel style. Next, please. So we can compare the drawings from the logbook, and they are so detailed that you can even see, maybe not very clear, but you can see the little bird on the rock on the bottom of the actual bowl, porcelain bowl, which coincides with the little bird drawn on the sketched by the crew member. So it must have been exactly the same. And of course, the shapes coincide with the ones which are also drawn in the logbook. Next, please. The capture of the San Diego is another historical, important historical fact which should not be overlooked in this early period. Yes, next, please. The ship was captured and brought to Middelburg, which is a city on the southern Netherlands. And also the documents concerning the capture of the San Diego mention that the town council was presented with packages. Some of them went to the treasurer, others went to the mayor. Next, please. The rest of is written in the document. The rest of what was part of the booty was going to be sold. Next, please. And even the Florentine merchant, Carletti, had put his merchandise on the ship, which he wrote himself in his diary, 5 large Chinese jars, the largest ones he had ever seen. So these are also very important facts. The capture of the Santa Catarina is the next one. Also taken back to Holland, there was a list with all kinds of items in part of the booty, the thread, the cloths, the gold, etc., etc. And the only mention of the Chinese porcelain was a countless number of porcelain. There's been a lot of discussion because there's one account which mentions a sum, but if you would change the sum, convert it, then it would amount to 100,000 pieces. Well, in my opinion, that's a bit overdone, but no documents as yet have been found with the exact amount. Thank you. Next, please. In 1602, it was decided that all these private companies doing their thing should be put together and one single company should be established. And that was the Dutch East India Company, known worldwide as the VOC. Next, please. Here again, the structure, just like the private companies in the beginning, is a bit complicated, but so I won't go into detail. It takes another lecture, I think, to do that. The structure is quite interesting. It's also been written in English. If anybody's interested, there are books about that. Next, please. Important was, of course, the shipbuilding industry, which occurred at the dockyards in Amsterdam, because the fleets of ships to Asia, the ships had to be of sturdy construction, and the wood, everything, it was a complete industry on itself. Next, please. So I have noted that in the period of the height of the VOC, can you imagine there were 4,700 ships sailing to Asia? They departed 3 times a year and returned twice a year. That had to do with the monsoon and also the markets, when the auctions at a certain time of year in the Netherlands. So sometimes they really had to hurry up and get all their commodities on board on time to make the return journey. And I must say it's quite clever that 3,400 ships made the return journey. Next, please. As you can see, it was not only going back and forth to Bantam, Batavia, or other places, the Spice Islands, to get their commodities. There was also an inter-Asia, very, very active inter-Asian trading what the VOC was able to buy from one place and trading it at another place. This is also part of the history of the VOC, which made it a multinational company. Next, please. The trade posts for buying porcelain, because there were many trade posts, and I'm only mentioning these 2. was mainly Bantam, or what I already showed, the marketplace, and Patani. Patani was not very, well, let's say, bustling. Probably it was bustling for the Asians, but not very well known for the Europeans, because I only could find some mentions of porcelain having been bought at the marketplace of Patani. But Patani is important because the Chinese merchants did go there, and there are accounts of having porcelain been sold or been bought by the Dutch merchants. Next, please. Then, of course, we have Batavia, which was first called Jakarta. Batavia was established in 1619 by Jan Pieterszoon Koen. It's not a very nice history, because the original population of Jakarta was, well, let's say, decimated, or probably completely thrown out of that area, and on that place, they decided to establish the city. It is a city of Batavia, which became the main, let's say, the main headquarters of the whole Asian trade of the VOC. Very important, with its own council, also dockyards there to clean the ships, repair them, warehouses to store up all the commodities before placing them on the ships. The Chinese junks also helped to come from the south coast of China, bringing also commodities. So it was, well, very important for the VOC at that time. Next, please. Now, how do we know all this? As I said before, documents, accounts. There are thousands of VOC archives in The Hague. And what data can they provide? Well, immense amount. Correspondence between the company's directors and the trade posts, the orders for the merchandise, the commodities, what was on the ship's cargoes going back or being put in the inter-Asian trade system, and of course what was delivered at the destinations. So there's enough material there to last hundreds of years if people want to research a certain period. And of course you would have to learn the old Dutch writing first, which I did not succeed to do. I had a lot of help. Next, please. You have a nice example of how this Dutch writing looked like. And I really admire the people who can read it and interpret it and convert it into, readable lists of cargo like the one you see there. Next, please. What I have done with the information I received from all these archives is list what, which ship carried which amounts of porcelain. And it's very interesting if you make a table, a chart of that, to see the enormous difference in periods, right? And this is still concerning the first period of the VOC up to 1624. At the first years, the first ships, early ships, hardly had any porcelain on it, according to the cargo lists. And then suddenly in 1614, 1615, there was a huge amount, only on one fleet actually, which carried that amount. And then it descended again, it rose again a little bit. And at the very end, there is one ship which has also, again, a very large amount of porcelain. So it was not a steady flow of porcelain going to Holland. And that somehow has seeped into a lot of historical ideas about the Dutch VOC history. As soon as the VOC was established, the porcelain just flowed in and piled up in Holland. Well, that is this shows that it's not at all correct. Next, please. I have only there are only 4 documented shipwrecks with Chinese porcelain, 4 which have been discovered and well, salvaged and documented. So we don't have much information yet. I think there are, it has been noticed 141, but so far, but of course that's the total one. In this beginning period, there are 4 which have enough information. Next, please. I'm not going all through them. These are the ones who have documents showing what cargo they had on them, how much, etc. And well, next, please. The first one, the Mauritius, dates from 1609. It was wrecked in the Gulf of Guinea in Africa, the west coast, and it was discovered in 1985 with only noted 250 items of Chinese porcelain. But it does give a good idea of what was carried back. Next, please. These have been documented luckily by the salvager. And interesting enough, we come across a certain type of dish with a very curious pattern, which I have not yet come across in later shipwrecks. So it could have been a trial out of the Chinese potters to make this pattern. I have found identical shards in Jingdezhen itself. Sorry, I forgot to put that on this slide, which makes it, of course, definite that it has been part of an export ware. Please, next. The white lion, the witte leeuw, which has already been mentioned by Guang Yu, is a big discovery. On its way back to Holland, it was blown up during a skirmish with the Portuguese, and the Belgian diver found only 200 complete intact pieces, but 300 kilos of fragments, which he was able to bring to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And that was when I came into the picture with a group of people to sort out and document all these fragments and place them into different categories. That book is not more available, but we are busy digitalizing everything. Next, please. This ship is the Banda, which was wrecked, was sunk by a typhoon at Mauritius Island. It has not been properly documented, and these pictures are from the museum Maubourg on the island, which luckily kept some examples. So we see that again, there are lots of the crack paneled type of dishes and some small clubbuts, small shallow bowls and flasks. It could have been even part of, or most likely have been part of the cargo of the governor general coming back from Asia, taking his own dinner service with him. Next, please. Well, like I said, what kind of porcelain? They're the crack panel types. There are a lot of Chinese shapes, the rice bowls, small cups, small dishes, and other types of ware, storage jars, the plain sturdy ware like the Zhangzhou ware. Next, please. Here are some examples. I put them into these three categories just to show that there are the fine porcelain ones category with the crack panels and the bowls, and there's a medium category which, excuse me, but of course very well good types of Chinese porcelain, but not really for European shaped use, and the large matavans and other items which could have been used for water, grain, etc. Next, please. Well, what did they order? The Dutch, the directors of the VOC in Amsterdam placed the orders, put them on the ship, was sent over to Batavia, then transferred to the merchants, to the trade posts. Most of the lists mention butter dishes or plates like our tin, the plates, because of course that is the most common type to eat from in Europe. Fruit dishes, well, I don't know if they were really meant for fruit, or maybe they were also used for soup or porridge. Next, please. And what you can do with all these lists is fascinating, because you can also really break all the types down, and amazingly you see all these very different types, and per ship cargo it varies enormously. So the orders might have been let's say 50,000 dishes, but what went back might have been much less, because they did not arrive at time, or it was not able to be made, produced such a large amount. All kinds of difficulties. Next, please. Like I said, the flatware was most popular, and these are all the types that's based on the White Lion catalog. All the variations. Next, please. I showed them just to, well, to give an example. Of course, these beautiful 17th century oil paintings are not, well, they don't really show people eating from these dishes. And that is also because they are part of the decoration of such a painting. The blue and white is so striking amongst the European dull tin plates, etc., that in most of these still life paintings of that period, there is some kind of blue and white dish, the Chinese porcelain. Next, please. Here I give some more examples. Next, please. Here's another one dated 1614, and you see one with some kind of berries on it. The other dish has some butter on it, and the other has some chicken things on it. So this could have been an example of what we called in Holland ontbijtje, which means a breakfast. Also very interesting to see what they ate at that time. Next, please. Here are again this very small dish, about 12 centimeters, which I presume would have been a butter dish. It is on several still life paintings, but we're not sure if it was just for the decoration, the nice color of yellow butter on blue and white Chinese porcelain dish. Next, please. And what this klapmuts, they call in Holland, a deep bowl could have been used for. In the decorative style, of course, with fruit, it looks beautiful. In use, maybe for porridge. Next, please. Here's some more examples. Next, please. What we call crow cup bowls is of course not of Chinese shape, and we don't know exactly from which original shape this could have come from. Again, in still life paintings, very popular to display, to illustrate. Next, please. Well, what does all this mean? Of course, in Holland, it is a token of luxury, abundance. You see the lady of the house is also quite abundant. And it has it shows a table laid with all kinds of wonderful snacks, etc. Next, please. Well-to-do families display their porcelain on earthen and also earthenware dishes in rich farmhouses. This is an example. Next, please. But did they use it for daily use? We see, I put a square on the place where the Chinese porcelain is displayed on the top of the cupboard. And this well-to-do family is sort of sitting around the table eating something, but they are not using the beautiful Chinese porcelain. Next, please. So there are very many examples of how the Dutch well-to-do families displayed Chinese porcelain, but it's not on the table. It's not being used. Next, please. Here is a reconstruction of a house in the north of Holland. Again, shelves with the Chinese porcelain displayed, all very beautiful, but did they use it? Next, please. This is even a wedding ceremony, which I found a picture of, an illustration of. And zooming in onto the tables, I did not see any Chinese porcelain whatsoever. It was all tin or pewter. Next, please. So the documents do illustrate that porcelain was part of the inventories. I show a few of them, but the interesting is that 342 inventories have been researched by a student, and she found that prior to 1625, no porcelain is listed at all. It was only after 1650. So there was no massive amounts of porcelain coming in and also not used by the Dutch. Next, please. Another proof besides the inventories, documents, are the shards, the finds from archaeological sites. The rubbish pits, I call them rubbish pits because, well, I don't really like the word cesspits, but they are very useful because discarded, broken items have been found, very many. And it shows they're usually next to the owner's house, so it has been documented by several archaeologists in Holland from who the owner of that porcelain which was found. Very, very important. Next, please. This is from a book which has been published in just a year ago, and it shows all the types of Chinese porcelain found in Amsterdam. also with the place and the variety. Next, please. Here are some items found in Delft. And Delft is another important city where the VOC also had its one of its headquarters in Holland. And you also see an example of a Dutch Delft imitation of the Chinese porcelain with the paneled crack type decoration. And of course, it is well known that Delft blue and white emerged after the blue and white items came from, porcelain came from China. Next, please. And what happened after 1624? Well, before the trade posts on Formosa, and which is now Taiwan, started really getting shipments from the south coast of China, they captured junks, and they captured also Portuguese ships. It was very handy to be able to get their merchandise from in that lucrative way. Next, please. So how do we end up? What is the use of porcelain? Well, you can do a lot of things with it. And besides taking a bath or other such daily, well, what do you call it, activities, there's a lot of other ways to display Chinese porcelain in an art way or as souvenirs. It's still being made, and it's part of our daily lives. Next, please. So I thank you very much for your attention and hope that I have brought a tiny little piece of the history. The next part is, of course, the important one of Formosa, Taiwan, but that will fill up another lecture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ketel, for giving us a systematic interpretation of the maritime trade and transportation of Chinese ceramics, with the focusing on the Dutch East Indian Company during the first half of the 17th century. And now we are open for discussions and questions. So everyone, if you have questions, please just let us know, or any comments and thoughts. Any questions? Let me check here. Any questions here? Here, not. Yeah. So I have a question here. One attendant is asking that, good afternoon, Dr. Christine. I want to know what are the differences of the demand between the Portuguese and Dutch. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you for your question. I tried to show that, but that was very quick, short. The Portuguese did not, they apparently had some orders, but these have not been completely documented. So we don't know exactly what they ordered, except for based on the shards which have been found in Spain and Portugal. They might not have even ordered those items. The only ones I showed, which they did order, were the ones with the Portuguese decoration. So they wanted to have some kind of Portuguese coat of arms or a religious symbol. And that's a big difference with the Dutch, with the VOC. They did not want any of such patterns on the Chinese, on their Chinese dishes and bowls. They preferred Chinese figures, Chinese landscapes, but nothing European, because that would not be exotic enough. So then the price would not be so high. They only wanted Chinese designs on the porcelain.
So the next question is, Dr. Ketel, you mentioned about cash. So what was the trading currency by that time? Thank you.
Yes, good question. And it is actually an important question, but of course, the economic side is so, well, very complicated and a huge subject. But the lists, the VOC lists of the invoices do have several types of currency. Most are guilders, so that would have been the old antique Dutch guilder. But what they used in Asia, especially in a marketplace like Bantam, Batavia, and used also with the Chinese merchants, are the Spanish reals. So the Spanish currency was used prior to the Chinese.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question is, good afternoon, Dr. Ketel. Most of the ceramics excavated from the Wheatleon part of the a part of the Rijksmuseum collection. She mean that if most of the ceramics that found from the Wheatleon are part of the Rijksmuseum's collection. And could we learn more about the online database of the Wheatleon? Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, the Rijksmuseum has an absolutely marvelous collection of Chinese, not only porcelain, but all sorts of items from all over Asia. That is completely separate from the collection of the White Lion, because the 300 kilos of shards, well, they were not able to be displayed, and they were part of the Department of History because it had to do with the VOC, and it was a dated collection. So that was that is still a complete separate part of the whole Rijksmuseum collection of Chinese ceramics. Like I said, the book is a catalog, of course, with a good introduction, but it is now time to digitalize something like that and make it available to everyone in the world. And it will take some time. I think the long, dark winter in Holland will help. Now I have more time. No, I can't say every little shard, but it has been a huge task of the Rijksmuseum to make proper photographs in color, because that was not in the first catalog. And of course, that has to be what do you call it, described, written, etc. So it will come, don't worry.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, thank you, Dr. Ketel. Can we call it as chinoiseries, or is chinoiserie only confined to the English? The adding of golden handles and different parts to the blue and white porcelains, does it deviate from the original design?
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you for your question. You should not confuse chinoiserie with the items I showed, which has of the Chinese porcelain, we call in Europe mounted porcelain, but they are the gold and the silver mounts are made separate, and then the treasured vessel is put into the mount. So it has not been made with the silver and gold. It has not been specifically made for that use, but because it was so precious and also very unique at that time, the nobility and the royal families had these mounts made, which were of course also very expensive, being in gold and silver. Okay.
Thank you. And the next question is, did the Dutch consume Chinese porcelains the most among the Europeans? Thank you.
Yes, I think so. At least the period of the first half of the 17th century. And that is because of the company which was able to bring, well, gradually large amounts of porcelain to Europe. There's even a document which says that we are very pleased to have received, let's say, 70,000 pieces, and it is very well received also by the French, for example. So that's also an interesting fact, which shows that it has spread through Europe. Thank you. But the Dutch were the most.
Thank you. The next question is, thank you, Dr. Ketel. Is there any reference book you would recommend for the study of VOC history?
Well, I would have to go to my bookshelf. Take it. Yes, there's there are some very good ones published in English. You can find it via the internet. You know, just search for VOC history, and then you will come across the titles.
And I think we can waiting for Dr. Ketel's new book to learn more about the history of VOC. And also we got the good news that your book will be translated into Chinese. So more readers can get to know more about the VOC history via your book. And the next question is, nice. Thank you.
And the back is also very nice. So it is a
wonderful. Yeah, we look forward to that. Thank you. Yeah. And the next question is, Dr. Ketel, what cargoes did the VOC take to Asia at this time? And did the ships actually reach China, or were the cargoes exchanged in Indonesia or elsewhere? Thank you.
Yes, I think I mentioned that the Dutch from Holland, you know, it's a very tiny little country, and we did not have many commodities to be able to please the Asian merchants and the Asian people, because they had everything. So that's why I showed this inter-Asian map, which shows how the Dutch were able to buy, like, well, let's say, of course, everyone bought pepper, but some regions in Asia were not able to go and buy the pepper themselves. So the VOC ships were also part of this inter-Asian trade, and that's was also very large income for the VOC to be able to just interchange the commodities of Asia, not their own commodities at all.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question asking about the reference book. Good afternoon, Dr. Ketel. May I know the title of the publication which you mentioned about the excavation in the Dutch? Thank you. Maybe you mean the archaeological part. Finds. Yeah.
I'm not sure what he mentions, but
she means the books that you have, maybe you have cited for your PowerPoint. Yeah.
Well, that's a problem because they are not in English. Oh. So the archaeological finds have been documented, and the one from Amsterdam, it's quite a thick book, but it's really an archaeological reference book, and it does not even have all that much Chinese porcelain in it. You know, it has everything, all kinds of metal and shoes and whatever they found in the pits in Amsterdam. And so it's just a clear list of things which have been found in Amsterdam, and the other ones done research are articles, most written in Dutch. So it has not really been, sorry about that.
Really a pity. Maybe we can look forward to someone who can translate them into English at least. So maybe the Chinese porcelain part, so we can learn more. We're always curious about the local discoveries in the Netherlands because that is very important, especially the early pieces. Yeah. And here's the next question. Is the Chinese porcelain still popular among the Dutch nowadays? Thank you.
Well, if you're talking about 17th century, 18th century Chinese porcelain, yes, definitely. There are so many collectors. And I don't know if it comes from the period that the first porcelain collections during the second half of the 17th century were built up, but it's still going on. And of course, we have our own porcelain industry now, the Delftware, and of course there are, all kinds of porcelain factories making non-Chinese porcelain, but the real Chinese porcelain is very, very popular.
Thank you. Is there any more questions here? Nothing? So it's my turn. Finally. I'm waiting for this moment for a long time because I really get a lot of questions to ask, but just make it in short. Actually, I would like to know more about the details, like how the Dutch and Portuguese are interact or compete among along the seal routes. Because as you mentioned, and as we all know that the Portuguese is occupied a lot of posts and castles, build a lot of castles along the travel route. So when the Dutch come to the travel sea, come into the Indian Sea, how they can just interact or compete with Portuguese, because you mentioned they captured their ships. How can they capture the ship and bring them back all along the way back to Europe? I cannot imagine. Can you share with us more details about this?
You're really very good at asking difficult questions. I remember that from previous conferences. Okay. Well, actually, it's very simple. The Dutch just captured them. I mean, they did not even negotiate with the Portuguese or the Spanish to, one of the orders of the VOC, one of the aims is to, let's see if I can quote, take over or drive the Portuguese away from their trade posts. So that's the complete answer. The order was take over the Portuguese trade posts or drive them away or capture their ships. Don't forget, this was war, and there was no negotiations or whatever. They just wanted to take over.
So can we understand the military power of the Dutch is very strong during the time. So even they did not have many castles along the sea roads, they still can capture the Portuguese ships and bring them back like that. Okay, thank you. There comes another question. A follow-up question. Dr. Ketel showed a shipwreck resulted from a conflict between the Spanish and the Dutch, or between the Spanish and the Portuguese, off the coast in Malacca. Which one? The audience is referred to, maybe San Diego or the Santa Catalina.
Yes.
And she wants to know that would you elaborate on that conflict? Were they fighting over the porcelains?
That would be nice. The Santa Catarina was, it's an interesting story, but then I'll need half an hour more. It was on its way from Macau, which it was filled with not only porcelain, but all kinds of, precious commodities. And the captain who captured the Santa Catarina was waiting in the Straits of Malacca near Johor to wait for the ship to pass by. And there's a whole story about it. I mean, I think it's fascinating. And then finally, the ship came along, and yes, he captured the ship and brought it ashore. So he didn't sink it. And he let the passengers go ashore. Then he took the ship, and there was nothing about, again, negotiations. There was no discussion about the porcelains. They just took the whole cargo, which included all the porcelains, first to Batavia. It was spread over a couple of ships, and then the fleet of about 5-6 took also the captured ship back to Holland, because it was a booty. So they wanted to show the ship, we've got one of these big Portuguese trade ships. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. And the next question is, Dr. Ketel, rather than mere purchase of finished products, was there any attempt to transfer the production technology or talents? Thank you.
I think you are talking about the porcelain talents of the talents of making porcelain.
Yeah, I guess so, and also the technology.
And the technology. As far as I know, the Dutch were not at. I'm still concentrating on this first period. This is the first quarter of the 17th century. As far as I know, they were not really interested. It was still a very precious item, and the only thing they were interested in is trying to get as much porcelain as possible. And how it was made, there is one document which I think even by Jan Pietersen, the Governor General of Batavia, who did write a letter, sent it back to the VOC directors, and he describes how porcelain was made in China, but that certain types were not allowed to leave the country. Very interesting detail. But they did not, were not interested to take over the technique, no.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ketel. Actually, you have mentioned, if I did not understand wrong, that you mentioned that the Chinese porcelain in Netherlands in the early time, it was being seen as like treasure instead of daily use utensils. So how about in Portugal and Spain? Like, for example, the Santa Clara Abilia, the site, it seems maybe they are also used Chinese porcelain as in their daily life. Or do you know?
Yes, sorry. The Santa Clara?
Abilia, the monastery site in Portugal.
Yeah. Yes, the nuns, in Coimbra, you mean that one?
Yeah. So
Um,
yeah, the story is different in Portugal and Spain, or like.
Not really, I don't think so, because that was what I found when I went there to visit the site
Yeah.
at Coimbra, that as you also know, it was not really part of the private property of the nuns themselves, but of the rich ladies who went there into the convent. So, and that has been documented, has been written about, which I thought was really interesting. So I don't know if they would really, they probably might have used it for, I don't know, a cup of chocolate or something like that. But what I mean is that overall, at this point, most of the displays, most of the porcelain is displayed instead of used, as far as I know.
Okay, thank you. We still have a little bit time, so maybe I can leave this time to Dr. Ketel to introduce your book a little bit more to us about, like you mentioned the chapter 5. So still I see a lot of other chapters. We are curious about like the framework of your book. So can you let us know more about it? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Guang Yu. I'm not really here to advertise it, but still. The book is made up of 6 chapters, and I start back to the Tang dynasty, because I find that if you want to show the complete history of trade, and of course the VOC is an important part of that, you should also, the forerunners, the history, what happened before the Europeans appeared. And I have dedicated my thesis to Roxana Brown, who was a very famous person, and I used her methods connecting the finds from shipwrecks to actually what has been made at kiln sites, etc. And I think she did this very well, and I think that the art historians have also taken over this method in the course of the years, because archaeologists have sometimes been, well, not frowned upon, but have been neglected. Well, you know, they come up with a few shards, but the real thing is are the items in the museums. Well, I've always disagreed with that. So that's why I also show the connection between the Tang and the Yuan and the Sung dynasty shipwrecks, what they contained, and where the porcelain was produced. And so that's how the book has been built up, also the Portuguese period. But of course, that has already been written extensively by Teresa Canepa, which her lecture will come. And so I was not planning to repeat that, of course. And of course, so I focused on the Dutch period. So this the middle part is, of course, the important one, is about crack porcelain, crack panel porcelain. I go very much in detail on the technique, but also the dating and the connection with the pieces which have been found. And I also show that I do not agree with some of the dating and also some of the rendition that all pieces without the panels are sometimes described in museums as being crack ware, which I find should be very put into a distinct category. So my theory is completely written out in the book, why I use this, why I come to this conclusion. And the last two chapters are what I already mentioned, the first part of the VOC trade up to 1624. Then they were allowed to, excuse me, allowed to use the island of Formosa, Taiwan. And then from only after 10 years, so from 1635 up to around 1645, 50, that was the main part of the height of the deliveries of Chinese porcelain to the trade post of Fort Zeelandia. It is a very short period. And again, just like the idea that Chinese porcelain poured into Holland from the start of the VOC, this period is also much shorter than, even though large quantities, I mean, I'm talking about 120,000 items. They could also be tiny wine cups, for example, so you can't really say, wow, that's a huge a mountain, a tsunami of porcelain. But that, well, that's in short how the book has been built up. And I have made a separate part of with appendices, because I found without pictures, without all the shards and documents which I mentioned in the thesis, I found it incomplete. So I think it's very important to have as much illustrations as possible. It was not possible to put it all in the book, so I made a separate appendices. That's about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Like we really enjoyed this lecture with so much knowledge and useful information shared by you. So thank you, Dr. Ketel. And I think this is a time to put an end to this lecture. And before that, please allow me to introduce our next guest speaker, which is Dr. Kobayashi Hitoshi, the Chief Curator of the Museum of Oriental Ceramics in Osaka. Dr. Christine also know him very well, right? And Dr. Kobayashi will talk about the Imari wares, which is designated for European markets in 17th to 18th century. And the lecture will be conducted in Putonghua. So welcome everyone to join us again next time. And thank you again, Dr. Ketel. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.